Hi, I'm Dylan. I try to cut down on waste by recycling plastic and paper products, but I realize I can do more by reducing food waste as well. This is hard to believe, but Americans throw away 35 million tons of food every year. That's nearly a third of all the food produced in this country ending up in the waste stream. That's ridiculous. So, to learn more about how to reduce food waste at home, I invited Dean Moberg, a conservationist with the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, to come on over to my house.
Hey, Dylan.
Hi, Dean. How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Ready to get your hands dirty?
Oh, absolutely. Always. So, what can I do to help keep food out of the waste stream?
Well, there's a few different ways that homeowners can do this. One is hot composting, which is a little bit tricky and complicated for most homeowners. Second way is cool composting or no-fuss composting. That works well. But what I want to talk with you about today is worm bin composting.
A worm bin? What do I need to make one?
Well, first you need a plastic container that's about 20 inches long, 15 inches wide, and 15 inches deep. It needs to be opaque because we don't want light to get in. Worms like to be in the dark. And it needs a tight-fitting lid so that the worms can't escape.
All right. What do you do once you got the bin?
Well, worms need to breathe, so we need to drill some large air holes in the sides of the bin to let fresh air in for the worms. This is a 1-inch bit. That's a good size to use for the air holes, so one hole in each side of the bin near the top. Perfect, nice work.
Thanks.
Next, we want to put some window screen over these holes to keep the worms from crawling out. We glue that in place with waterproof glue. Okay, so now the worms will have plenty of fresh air, but we have to put some drainage holes in the bottom of the bin to let the worm tea out.
All right.
A 1/8 inch hole is good for that. That's small enough that the worms won't be able to crawl through it.
You mentioned something about worm tea?
Yes, so worm tea is a natural byproduct that the worms create as they digest your food scraps. It's loaded with nutrients for your plants and it's got a lot of beneficial microorganisms. So we want to make sure that we capture that worm tea, and we do that by using a slightly larger plastic container that we set the worm bin inside of.
Something like this one?
That's perfect. This one can be transparent because there's not going to be any worms inside of that. We do want something in the bottom of that container to lift the worm bin slightly up off the bottom, something that's waterproof.
All right, well, I've got some old PVC. Is that okay?
That works great, yep. Now we'll just put the worm bin inside of that.
So what's next?
Well, the next step is to put some paper scraps in the bottom. Can be shredded newspaper, shredded office paper, but just try to avoid paper that's shiny or is colored. So if we could add some water to that, the worms will be happier. We're shooting for sort of the moisture level of a wrung out sponge. That looks great, and you can work that around with your hands a little bit to mix the water and the paper together.
Okay.
Okay, great. Now let's put a couple of handfuls of garden soil into the bin. That gives the worms some grist, which helps their digestive system. Eggshells work for that too.
All right, is it time to add the worms?
Let's add the worms.
So can you tell me a little more about these guys?
Yeah, so these red wriggler worms are special worms that are best for worm composting. You can get these at some garden stores, you can buy them online, or best approach is to find somebody who's got a worm bin and get some of their worms.
I've been saving these food scraps here. How can I make sure that my worms are well fed and happy and everything?
First of all, let's dig a little bit of a hole in the bedding. We'll put the food scraps into the hole, then cover it up. That tends to keep the flies down. So worms are vegetarian, so any kind of fruit or vegetable scrap is good, like this watermelon rind. Banana peels are good, but you notice that this banana peel has one of those annoying stickers on it. These are not digestible by worms or anything else, so take those off. There are some food scraps that theoretically would be digestible, like avocado skins, but my worms tend not to eat those. If you see things that you've put in your worm bin and the worms haven't eaten them in like 2 weeks, just take them out and throw them away. You want to try to avoid any kind of dairy product or meat product or pet waste.
All right, that's pretty easy to remember.
Yeah, other than that, you're good. Then you cover up the food scraps and the worms will be happy.
Is there a place I should put them in particular?
Well, worms like a constant temperature, just like people do. So you want to keep your worm bin someplace where it won't freeze, but also out of direct sunlight where it will get too hot. So some people keep their worm bins in the garage, some people in the basement, some people even under the kitchen sink.
And how will I know that the compost is ready to use?
It should be ready to use in about 2 or 3 months after you start, but you definitely want to harvest it before the compost gets up to those 1-inch air holes that you drilled in the sides. So a few weeks or a couple of months before you start to harvest, always put the food scraps in one end of the bin, because then the worms will migrate to that end and you can harvest the compost from the other end.
Easy.
Yeah, so you can take that compost or worm castings and sprinkle it around your garden plants or put it around your potted plants inside the house.
That sounds great.
Now, the other thing to remember is that worm tea. So every 2 weeks or so, check the bottom bin to make sure that it's not getting too full of worm tea. You can get it out of the bottom bin with a turkey baster, and then you can use this worm tea and sprinkle it around your garden plants, or maybe dilute it 50-50 with water for your house plants.
That's so awesome. I had no idea I could make something so useful out of just food scraps I'd otherwise be thrown away.
Yeah, well, the worms are doing all the work, Dylan. But for more information, you can check out online tualatin.swcd.org.
Right on. Well, thanks a lot, Dean.